We went back to the hotel to prepare for the next day, our first day of shooting with President Zelensky. I must have been asleep about 10 minutes by the time the first rocket hit the city. And so everything changed. And then he kept the meeting with us the next day and we started shooting this film.
The film we'd set out to make was not meant to encounter an existential threat to democracy, just a spirited story of a comedy superstar turned president.
Be careful.
The average amount of people traveling, part of our crew, were between 3 and 5. A total of 7 trips, gosh, typically about a week at a time. We're currently in this situation where there's a major Russian buildup.
The situation was changing and feeling more urgent. Go, go, go.
They had 2 impacts in town. Billy Smith and I we met, I think it was at the CGI, the Clinton Global Initiative meeting in New York one year. We started talking about documentaries. We had a couple of different ones that we had pursued and for various reasons decided not to do. He had made contact with a good friend of President Zelensky's. And this is at a time where the United States, most of us were being introduced to Zelensky through a bad phone call with the then President Trump. The way that he was handling what must have been an incredibly difficult period with the relationship between the United States and Ukraine seemed awfully mature for somebody who had not been in politics for long. You hear the stories of the history he has as an actor, start watching some of the shows of Servant of the People. He was a talented actor, very charismatic, very charming. And we had the opportunity through this friend of Billy's to perhaps be in touch with President Zelensky and get his participation. And so we decided we'd make this whimsical tale of this comedic actor who played a president in a comedy, then becoming the president of Ukraine. And then COVID got in our way. And it was difficult to travel. In some cases, it was forbidden. He said, let's wait and do this after, because we met him on Zoom during the COVID lockdowns. What I said to him was that I didn't want him to say yes, he'd participate until he met me face to face, that he'd have a chance to, because I really wanted his trust, and I was going to ask everything. At that time, one thought they were going to ask the big question, what happened on that phone call? Well, of course, he did an incredible Axios interview where he addressed it head on. And so what had been important, or wherever we thought we would start in the pursuit of the story of Ukraine and this president, changed. And now we were hearing the drums of Russia. By the time we were able to visit with him the first time, it just ended up being visit face-to-face, but no cameras. It would be on the 23rd of February, 2022, the day before the invasion. And he agreed that he'd go on camera the following day. And it was a good meeting. And I knew I liked him. Whip smart, warm, and didn't have the contrivances or the guards that I'd seen in political leaders all over the world. We went back to the hotel to prepare for the next day, our first day of shooting with President Zelensky, and we ultimately decided to get some rest, and we laid down in our rooms, and I don't know, I must have been asleep about 10 minutes by the time the first rocket hit the city. And so everything changed. And then he kept the meeting with us the next day and we started shooting this film.
This is about vengeance. Putin's angry that this country wants to divorce itself from Russia forever, and he wants it back.
What I felt was a profound heartbreak. It was really clear that day that something evil and beyond stupid, a complete collapse of imagination had happened in the Kremlin, in Putin, and to a large degree in Russian culture, creating a kind of sepsis on humanity. All of the ways in which this is going to continue to impact all of our lives. As long as there's a war being fought, in part leveraging fossil fuels, we're not moving forward on climate change issues, right? So this is a thing that, all of of course, the deaths and the destruction, meaningless stuff. But it was also heartbreaking because one knew, you sensed it from our first trip in November and the attention we had paid that country since we started this. It was so clear that something magic was going on in terms of the unity of that country. So there was no version of this where Russia could win, and it would be one more war somebody else won over somebody else, and off we go home. There was no such thing as a win for the Russians here. So I think the kindest thing one could say about Putin is he has absolutely no imagination, and he's an utter bore.
We need Americans to understand the price we have to pay to be free.
Because of our proximity to active combat, that's the priority.
Guys, no grass. These fields are mine.
There's a lot of ways you could end the sentence. None of us thought that Ukraine could this. None of us would ever have imagined that this comedian turned president would become this. This is not the old story. In the old story, when the world media reports a total encirclement of Kyiv, that regime has collapsed. And a puppet regime is put in. That's the story, always the story, everywhere in the world. What's different about this story is that, and where Ukraine, and I believe it will, and it's moving to me to think about this, that it's going to rewrite the rhythm of history this way. I think Ukraine can be the story of sustained unity in peacetime. That doesn't mean lack of diversity of political thought, but that they are going to remember that they are one. I sense that's going to happen. I sense it's going to happen in part because of Zelensky's leadership, but I sense it from kind of the all walks of life people that we've spent time with, that there's something new in world history happening, and it's starting with Ukraine, and that it'll be a great teacher for the world.
If Ukraine fails, it's not just a failure for democracy.
Everything that happens here is going to affect every other place in the world today. That's the reason that we're all so invested in this.
I don't think that our country should underestimate the insobriety of privilege. And we are privileged that our children are not being hit by rockets right now. We are privileged that we are not in some kind of a civil war right now. With this film, as much as it's about Ukraine, as much as it's about Zelensky, that turns out to be only the most potent vehicle to create the discussion about building community, because we're social creatures, and if we can't wake up in the morning to a world that assumes it's in partnership with each other, whether it's our neighborhood, our house, then I do, as they say in the film, it doesn't take rocket science to know that what we're doing is designing for mental unhealth. Unless we're humble enough to realize we're social animals, and what does that mean? I don't have to wake up in the morning and assume my neighbor hates me.